Jessica never saw it coming. One moment, Alyssa was laughing at their inside jokes, scrolling through their vacation photos. The next, her face hardened as she said, "I'm seeing someone else." The words landed like shrapnel, quiet, sharp and irreversible. Jessica's breath hitched. They were sitting in their favorite booth, the one with the chipped corner and red vinyl seats. The smell of coffee and fried food lingered, but suddenly it all felt foreign. Alyssa wouldn't even make eye contact. Her hands trembled slightly as she grabbed her phone, sliding out of the booth like it was just another Tuesday. Jessica couldn't move. She stared at the empty seat across from her, heart pounding, confusion drowning out everything. This wasn't a fight. This was an ending. The waitress came by and paused, recognizing the devastation but saying nothing. Jessica finally blinked, her eyes burning. The world hadn't stopped spinning, but hers had. The apartment felt like a tomb. Jessica sat on the edge of their shared bed, now impossibly large and empty. Her phone buzzed. Another friend asking what happened. She didn't answer. Photos of them still hung on the wall, smiling, laughing, pretending forever was guaranteed. The silence was deafening, the absence, a living thing. Her hand traced over a picture frame on the dresser, Alyssa kissing her cheek on a beach trip. The glass was cracked. Had it always been? Jessica whispered, "Why didn't I see it?" The smell of Alyssa's perfume still lingered on the pillow. Jessica curled into herself, pulling a sweater to her chest. Her world was collapsing inward, not with violence, but with a slow and unbearable ache. Jessica opened Alyssa's drawer, then shut it just as fast. Her fingers trembled. Every object felt sacred and wrong. She wasn't looking for anything, just proof it all meant something. Her mind replayed moments, late-night walks, Alyssa brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, their whispered promises. It didn't match the woman who left her. Was it all fake? Or had love just died quietly while she wasn't watching? She took out a sweater Alyssa had once lent her and held it to her face, breathing in the scent. Her sob broke the silence. This was grief, but worse. Grieving someone still alive. Just gone. Later that night, Jessica sat on the bathroom floor, the cold tile pressing into her skin. She couldn't sleep. Her face was flushed, eyes puffy from crying. In her lap sat her journal, blank pages staring back. She wrote, "She left," and stopped. What more was there to say? Her fingers hovered above the pen, then trembled. She dropped it. The silence pressed in again. She whispered, "I don't know who I am without her." Her reflection in the bathroom mirror caught her off guard, a stranger, broken and small. She wrapped her arms around her knees, rocking gently as the night stretched on. Morning came, but it brought no relief. Jessica watched light creep through the blinds, slicing across the living room floor. She sat in the same hoodie, clutching a cold cup of tea she'd never sipped. Her phone remained silent. She had always imagined heartbreak as something loud, a scene from a movie. But this was quiet, invisible. The ache lived behind her ribs, stretching deeper with every breath. She whispered Alyssa's name once, and it shattered something in her. She didn't cry this time. She just sat, hollow, letting the morning light bear witness to what was left behind. The days blurred together. Jessica stopped replying to messages. She let food go cold on the table and sat in silence until nightfall. Her inbox piled up, and the world kept moving without her. Friends texted with concern, but she turned her phone face down. It wasn't just the breakup. It was the feeling of failure, of being discarded like she never mattered. She stayed inside, curtains drawn, the hum of the refrigerator the only constant. In the quiet, the pain had room to grow. She wasn't ready to be seen, not even by herself. Grief had wrapped itself around her like a blanket that suffocated instead of soothed. Days became nights, and nights bled into mornings with no sense of meaning. She stopped checking the time. Jessica's best friend, Naomi, knocked for the third time. No answer. She left a bag of groceries at the door, granola bars, instant soup, a handwritten note that read, "You're not alone." Inside, Jessica stared at the door, unmoving. She had heard the knocks. She had heard all of them. But she didn't know how to explain that grief had turned her bones heavy, her voice useless. She wanted to open the door. She just couldn't move. The silence returned, thick as fog. Her eyes shifted to the note later that night, its edges curled. Her fingers traced the ink. It was the first time in days she had touched something real. Jessica finally opened the curtains. Morning light poured in like judgment, harsh and unapologetic. Dust floated in the air, revealing how long it had been. She looked around, cluttered coffee table, stained mug, untouched laundry. Her reflection in the window startled her. Pale skin, tired eyes, hair matted from too many days in bed. She exhaled slowly, touched the glass. "You need to come back," she whispered, not to Alyssa, but to herself. It wasn't a decision. It was a plea. Somewhere deep inside, a part of her that had been quiet through the storm finally stirred. Later that afternoon, Jessica found a box under her bed, old journals, notes from high school, scribbled quotes from teachers. Among them, she spotted Mr. Thomas's handwriting. She hadn't thought about him in years. He was the one who always saw something in her even when she didn't. She opened a folded paper, aged and delicate. It read, "Don't let them define your worth." She paused. It was so small, that sentence. But it felt louder than anything she'd heard in weeks. She sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by old memories. For the first time, she felt something that wasn't pain, just the faintest whisper of strength. That night, she lit a candle and opened her journal for the first time in weeks. Her hand hovered over the blank page, unsure what would come out. Then she began to write, not about Alyssa, but about herself. "I used to feel strong," she wrote. "I want to remember that girl." The words spilled slowly, clumsy at first, but honest. She kept writing. No filters. No edits. Just pain, memory, hope. She filled 3 pages before the tears came. But this time, they were different. Not paralyzing, not shattering, just release. She looked at the flame, steady and quiet, and realized maybe she wasn't as broken as she thought. Jessica began going on short walks. Not for exercise, not for any grand purpose, just to feel her feet move again. One morning, she passed the old bookstore near her college and stopped. In the window was a faded poster of a poetry reading. Something about it tugged at her. She stepped inside, the smell of old paper greeting her like a forgotten friend. In the back corner, she found a worn copy of a book Mr. Thomas had once recommended. She remembered him handing it to her, saying, "This isn't just a book, it's a mirror." She sat on the floor between the aisles, thumbing through its pages. For the first time in a long while, her heart didn't ache, it stirred. Her pain hadn't disappeared, but it had made space for something else, memory, connection, maybe even healing. That evening, Jessica pulled Mr. Thomas's letter back out. She read every word slowly. He had written it years ago, as part of a class assignment, a mock letter to their future selves. But he'd slipped in something extra. "You have a fire inside you," it said. "Don't let people pour water on it just because they can't light their own." Jessica smiled through tears. She remembered how hard he had pushed her, how he always saw potential even when she only saw flaws. He believed in her, maybe more than anyone ever had. And maybe, just maybe, that belief didn't have to die with him. Maybe it could be reborn through her. The next day, Jessica found herself outside her old high school. She didn't know why she drove there, only that something unfinished still echoed inside those walls. The parking lot was mostly empty. She walked along the brick facade, memories flashing like film stills, cutting class, fighting back tears, Mr. Thomas pulling her aside and telling her she was wasting her life. Back then, it felt like judgment. Now she heard it differently, like a warning she hadn't been ready to accept. She stood outside the locked entrance, hands in her coat pockets, heart pounding. "You were trying to save me," she whispered. Her voice caught in the wind and drifted away. Later, back at home, Jessica pulled out a fresh notebook. This time, she didn't write about Alyssa. She wrote about Mr. Thomas. About the things he said, the way he challenged her, and the truths she didn't want to hear at the time. She wrote as though she were speaking to him now, telling him she finally understood. She wrote until her hand cramped, the candle beside her burning low. With each sentence, she felt the weight lift. She wasn't just journaling. She was unearthing herself from the rubble of heartbreak. Word by word, she began to rebuild a version of herself that felt honest, raw, and finally free. Jessica's phone buzzed. It was Naomi again. This time she answered. "Hey," her voice cracked. Naomi's reply was simple. "I've missed you." And just like that, something shifted. They met for coffee the next day, laughter hesitant at first, then easy, like sunlight through storm clouds. Naomi didn't ask for explanations. She just listened. And Jessica talked, not about Alyssa but about writing again, about her visit to the school, about wanting to do something meaningful. As they left the cafe, Naomi looked at her and said, "You're coming back to life." Jessica paused, then smiled, really smiled, for the first time in what felt like forever. Jessica laced up her running shoes for the first time in months. The pavement stretched ahead like a dare, and her legs protested at first, but she pushed forward. She wasn't chasing fitness or trying to erase pain. She was chasing momentum. Each breath felt raw, but it was hers. Her heartbeat, her effort, her choice. She ran past places that used to remind her of Alyssa, but they didn't sting as much. Now they held space for someone else, herself. Sweat beaded on her brow, wind tangled her hair, and with every step, her chest opened a little more. She wasn't healed. She was healing. And that difference, though small, was everything. That evening, Jessica walked into a community center. A flyer had caught her eye. Adult education, creative writing, no experience necessary. The classroom smelled like dry erase markers and old coffee, and the chairs squeaked under weight. She sat near the back, unsure if she belonged. But when the instructor asked them to write about a person who changed their life, Jessica's pen didn't hesitate. Mr. Thomas's name flowed onto the page, followed by every word she'd held in for years. When time was up, she looked around and saw others writing their own stories, their own pain. For the first time, she didn't feel alone. After class, Jessica lingered in the hallway, flipping through her notebook. That's when she heard a voice beside her say, "You write like it matters." She turned to see a woman her age, calm eyes, quiet presence. "I'm Lena," she said. Jessica introduced herself, feeling a flicker of curiosity. They talked about the class, then books, then slowly, life. It wasn't flirtation. It was connection. Pure and patient. Lena smiled and added, "Keep writing. You have something to say." Jessica watched her walk away, heart fluttering not with fear, but possibility. Something new had begun. Not a romance. Not yet. Just a spark of something real. Over the next few weeks, Jessica and Lena sat together in class, exchanged books, and shared lunches at the nearby park. It was slow, unforced, and comforting. One day, Lena handed her a worn paperback with a note inside. "This reminded me of you." Jessica didn't know what to say, so she didn't. She just smiled, one of those full, quiet smiles that reach the eyes. She wasn't falling for Lena. Not yet. But she was beginning to believe in something she hadn't dared to imagine. That maybe the story of her life wasn't over. Maybe it was just beginning again, with a different kind of chapter. One night, Jessica walked past the mirror and stopped. She studied her reflection. The girl staring back looked different, not because of a new hairstyle or outfit, but because of the way she stood. Shoulders back. Eyes steady. Not lost. She traced the curve of her jaw, noticing how strong she looked. Stronger than she had ever felt. Alyssa's ghost no longer loomed in the corners. In its place was something else. Peace. Jessica whispered to herself, "You're doing it. Not moving on. Not forgetting. But choosing. Choosing to keep going. To show up. To matter." And that, she realized, was everything. Jessica opened her inbox and paused. A message sat unread from Alyssa. The subject line read, "Just wondering how you're doing." Her pulse quickened. For a second, her fingers hovered over the mouse, frozen. She wasn't angry, not anymore. But she wasn't curious either. She clicked. The message was short, vague, and strangely familiar. Alyssa's words danced around regret without ever naming it. Jessica read it twice, then closed the laptop. She didn't reply. Not out of spite, but because she no longer owed her healing to anyone's closure. For the first time, she realized she didn't need Alyssa's voice to narrate her story. She had her own now, and it was louder than ever. Later that afternoon, Jessica met Lena at a small art exhibit downtown. The space buzzed with quiet voices and warm lighting. They strolled side by side, stopping in front of a painting of a fractured tree still blooming. "It's damaged, but still growing," Lena said softly. Jessica looked at the piece, then at Lena. "That's how I feel lately." Lena didn't press or pry. She simply nodded and stood beside her. It wasn't romance. Not yet. But it was something more powerful: understanding. Jessica realized that healing didn't always look like forgetting. Sometimes it looked like being seen and not needing to explain why you're still standing. They walked to a nearby cafe afterward, the air thick with that quiet magic only found between people who truly listen. Lena asked, "What do you want now?" Jessica sipped her tea, thoughtful. "To help someone like me," she said. "Someone who thinks it's too late." Lena smiled, setting down her cup. "Then you should." And it was that simple. Not a plan, not a 5-year goal, just a beginning. Jessica didn't know what form it would take. A workshop, a blog, a mentorship program. But the seed had been planted. She was no longer just surviving. She was beginning to imagine building something lasting. That night, Jessica stayed up late, sketching out ideas in her journal. Page after page filled with phrases, story circles, letters to the past, healing spaces. She remembered how Mr. Thomas had believed in her before she ever believed in herself. If she could offer even a fraction of that to someone else, maybe that would be enough. She felt something growing in her, purpose. Not dramatic, not loud. Just steady. Like a slow building fire. She looked out the window, watching the streetlights shimmer against the dark. "Maybe you were right," she whispered. "Maybe this was never the end." She kept writing. 1 week later, Jessica stood in a small rented room at the library. Chairs circled around her, a hand-painted sign on the door, "Writing for Healing," led by Jessica. Only 3 people came. It didn't matter. She introduced herself with shaking hands, heart racing, but eyes clear. "I used to think stories were just something we survived. Now, I think they're how we heal." She looked around the room. They nodded. They were listening. She handed out paper and pens. As they started writing, Jessica stepped back and watched. It was small, yes, but it was real. Her pain had built this space. And from it, something beautiful was beginning. Jessica's small writing circle grew. Slowly, steadily. People told friends, and those friends brought their stories. One afternoon, a teenage girl named Mariah walked in, eyes downcast, arms folded tight. She reminded Jessica of herself, sharp edges guarding soft pain. When the session ended, Mariah stayed behind. "I don't know how to write about what hurts," she said. Jessica replied, "Then start with what you wish someone had told you." Mariah nodded, silently. That night, Jessica reread her own journals. So much of her pain had become purpose. Mr. Thomas hadn't just saved her, He'd taught her how to save herself. Now she was passing it on. That evening, Jessica found one of Mr. Thomas's old journals in a box she hadn't touched in years. Inside were lesson plans, quotes scribbled in the margins, and a note with her name on it. "She's not ready now," it said, "but one day she will be." Jessica pressed her fingers to the page, tears blurring the ink. He had seen her future, even when she couldn't. All those times she'd stormed out of class, refused to listen, he had never stopped believing. The world hadn't been kind to him, but he had chosen to be kind to it anyway. Jessica made a quiet promise then, to keep that kindness going, no matter what. Days later, she visited Mr. Thomas's grave. A gentle breeze stirred the trees, and the cemetery was quiet, but not heavy. Jessica knelt beside the stone, hands resting on her lap. "You were right," she whispered. "I wasn't ready, but I am now." She placed a single white flower down, then added something else, a copy of her writing group's first flyer. "I thought I'd lost everything," she said aloud. "But I was just clearing space." Her voice cracked but didn't break. The wind picked up, lifting the corners of her coat. She closed her eyes, letting the silence answer her. It didn't hurt the same anymore. Mariah began showing up early to writing sessions, asking questions, offering ideas. One day, she handed Jessica a short piece titled, "My Walls Had Cracks." Jessica read it with quiet awe. The words were raw and unsure but honest. "You're a writer," she told Mariah. The girl blushed, shrugged. "You think so?" Jessica nodded. I know so." The torch had passed, even if Mariah didn't realize it yet. Jessica wasn't just healing herself anymore. She was helping others write their way out of darkness. Each person in that circle was a reminder that pain could become art, that survival could shape stories worth telling. Jessica stood at her window that evening, watching the city pulse with quiet life. She felt the stillness inside her, not emptiness, but calm. Behind her, a folder lay open on the desk, notes for a grant proposal to expand the program. She touched the window glass gently. "Thank you," she said, not to Alyssa, not even to Mr. Thomas, but to herself. The girl who didn't give up. The woman who chose to grow. Her reflection looked back at her, no longer fragmented. She had built something from the wreckage, something lasting. This wasn't about who left. It was about who stayed. And she had stayed. She had fought. And she had won. It was the first day of her new role. Jessica stood at the front of a real classroom, not as a guest speaker or volunteer, but as the teacher. The bell hadn't rung yet, but she arrived early, arranging papers, checking the board twice. The walls still smelled of whiteboard cleaner and pencil shavings, familiar, grounding. She paused, placing a photo of Mr. Thomas on her desk in a small, simple frame. "Let's do this," she whispered to herself. There were no nerves, just focus. She had come full circle, not to relive the past, but to rewrite the future. When the door opened and students began to trickle in, Jessica stood tall, smiling, not performative, not forced, but real. The students were hesitant at first, eyes darting, quiet whispers. Jessica remembered being on the other side of that gaze, skeptical and guarded. She welcomed them with a simple line. "Every person here has a story. Let's find yours." A murmur of surprise followed. She passed out blank journals, asking them to write about anything they wanted. No rules, just truth. One student, a shy boy in the back, raised his hand. "Even if it's messy?" Jessica nodded. "Especially if it's messy." She saw it then, the spark of curiosity, the door cracking open. The same door Mr. Thomas had once opened for her. Only now, she was holding the handle. After class, Jessica sat alone, reading a few of the early journal entries left behind. They were raw, some heartbreaking, others hopeful. One simply said, "I don't know how to talk about my pain yet, but I'm trying." She placed it down gently, overcome. This was more than teaching. This was legacy. She imagined Mr. Thomas looking on, not with pride but with quiet affirmation, like he always knew she'd get here eventually. Jessica wiped her eyes and looked around the room. The scuffed desks, crooked posters, half-used erasers, they all felt sacred now. This wasn't the ending of her story. It was the passing of the pen. Later that week, Lena visited the school after hours, bringing coffee. They sat on the front steps, sharing quiet laughter as the sun dipped below the trees. "You look different," Lena said. Jessica raised an eyebrow. "Older?" "No," Lena smiled. "Lighter." Jessica sipped her drink, then looked toward the playground, where wind stirred the empty swings. "I thought heartbreak would break me," she said. "But it made space instead." Lena leaned into her shoulder gently, no need for words. Jessica didn't know where this would go between them, but for once she didn't need certainty. She just needed this: presence, peace, and a path forward. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the classroom windows. Jessica stood at the front, marker in hand, preparing for her first full lesson. She paused, looking out over the room filled with potential. Her voice steady, she began. "Let's talk about resilience today." The students leaned in. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. Inside, something rooted itself, deep and lasting. Jessica smiled, not because she had moved on, but because she had grown beyond. She glanced briefly at Mr. Thomas's photo, then turned to the board, writing one last phrase. "You were right. I finally understand." And with that, the new chapter began.